Hello and welcome to the Authentic Freedom Virtual Church. My name is Lori Lumby and I am the pastor and spiritual director of this online virtual community. Let us pause for a moment as we prepare our hearts and our minds to receive God's nourishment for us today. In this week's service, the second Sunday of Lent 2015, I want to talk about the Bible. We had a great opportunity in the Agape Meditation newsletter this week to explore in detail the story of Abraham and Isaac and how that relates to our understanding of God and our understanding of Jesus' role in human evolution. We had an opportunity through the Agape Meditation newsletter to take a look at these stories from a different perspective, to examine them from a historical, not literal, but historical perspective. What we learned is that the Abraham and Isaac story is really a metaphor, or an archetype, if you will. That Abraham and Isaac, the story of Abraham and Isaac, represents a shift in the spiritual evolution of Western society. Specifically, a shift from polytheism to monotheism, which means the shift from believing in many gods versus the belief in one God. It also represents a shift in cultic practices. Biblical scholars understand that Abraham represents the shift from a culture that believed in human sacrifice to a culture that no longer believed in human sacrifice. As such, the story of Abraham and Isaac provides a snapshot in a much larger picture of the evolution of human spirituality. When we look at the story of Abraham and Isaac through this lens, we can see that the entire Bible represents snapshots that took place over the course of somewhere around 2,000 years of how human beings in the Middle East and moving towards the West were evolving spiritually. Moving from cultures that tended to worship the nature gods, cultures that were dependent upon the cycles of nature for their own well-being, and were dependent upon making the gods happy so that their crops would be blessed, so that their hunt would be blessed, so that they might not just survive, but also thrive. Moving from a nature-based worshiping model into something that was beyond nature. Moving from many gods, the god of thunder, the god of rain, the god of sun, to a single God. And in that transition, reframing, reconstructing, redefining what God was and what God meant. In the beginning, human beings experienced the divine as fickle, like the turn of the weather, unpredictable, sometimes violent, sometimes horrible, but also sometimes warm and comforting. As human beings evolved, so too did our understanding of God. God went from unpredictable, fickle, even angry, as we see in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Scriptures, also intertwined with deep experiences of the divine as love. God is a loving mother. God is a source of comfort. God is a source of healing. In the Hebrew scriptures, we see many different representations of the divine: loving, angry, fickle, generous. As we move through the experience of the Hebrews and their evolving experiences of God, we see many different ways in which God communicated God's self to the human race. Fast forward to Jesus, and we begin to see an entirely different experience of the divine. With Jesus, instead of a God that is wrathful, judgmental, fickle, angry, hateful, we learn of the God of love. We learn of a God that is unconditionally loving, kind, generous, supportive, a source of healing, comfort, and guidance. And we learn of a God that loves without condition. A God whose love does not need to be earned. A God whose love cannot be denied. But in truth, Jesus' dramatic departure from the wrathful, vengeful God was too much for humanity to take, too much for us to accept, because we were still wrapped up in ideas of God of vengeance, of God of war, of God that's love has to be earned. Fast forward to today. 2,000 years since Jesus first planted the seed of an idea of an unconditionally loving God. 2,000 years later, we're still struggling to accept this idea of God. We're still struggling to understand that God loves us generously, infinitely, always. And we struggle with this because we're still evolving. We're still tied up in the images that are taught to us about a God that might punish us, a God that might condemn us to hell, a God whose love we have to earn by doing XYZ, saying so many prayers, paying for indulgences. We're still struggling to embrace and accept the God that Jesus taught us, the God of love. And we'll continue to evolve. We will continue to evolve and grow in our understanding of this God of love that Jesus came to teach us, as long as we are trying to learn how to love ourselves. The Bible is a great book about the evolution of human spirituality. It didn't start there, and it doesn't end there. My invitation for us, as we continue to evolve into and through the seeds that Jesus planted 2,000 years ago, my invitation is that we begin to write our own book. How is God evolving within us? How is our understanding of God becoming softer, gentler, more loving? Who will God continue to reveal God's self as, even beyond the unconditionally loving God that Jesus came to teach us about? God is infinite. And even unconditional love is not enough to describe the God that has made us, that loved us into being, that seeks to be loved through us, and who wants to transform the world through our very being and through our very nature. And as we allow our images of God to evolve, so too shall the world evolve with us. Jesus once said, "You will do greater things even than this." This is our invitation, to be open to the possibility of an even bigger, larger, more amazing God than what Jesus himself could even imagine.